Welcome to Case Vault, where every case has a crack, a contradiction, a missed clue, a detail that should not be there. Today we're looking at a $17 million robbery pulled off by amateurs, and the one thing the people closest to it never noticed. Charlotte, North Carolina. The evening of October 4th, 1997. A man walks out of an armored car company and gets into an unmarked company van. The van is carrying more than $17 million in cash. There's no alarm, no shootout, no chase. He just drives it out the gate. Here's the strange part. The man who took the money is about to end up with almost none of it, and the case won't be cracked by anything clever. It'll be cracked by a strip of paper, something worth nothing at all, and the thieves never even thought to take it off. Loomis, Fargo and Company moves cash for a living. Armored trucks, bank deliveries, the money no one ever really sees. Their regional office in Charlotte had a vault, and inside that vault on any given day sat millions of dollars waiting to be moved. The man in charge of that vault was named David Gant. He was the vault supervisor. Steady job, ordinary life, not much money. Every working day, David Gant stood inside a room with more cash in it than he would earn in 100 lifetimes, and he was the one who locked the door at night. The idea didn't start with him. It started with an old co-worker named Kelly Campbell. Campbell had worked at Loomis Fargo too. She knew the building, she knew the routine, and she knew David Gant. She also knew a man who would happily organize the rest of it. His name was Steve Chambers. Chambers had a small detail in his past that's worth holding on to. At one point, he had been an informant for the FBI. A former FBI informant was now building a plan for one of the biggest cash robberies in the country. And the plan itself was simple. Almost insultingly simple. Gant was already inside the vault. He just had to carry the money out. On October 4th, 1997, David Gant went to work like it was any other shift. There was a newer co-worker on with him that evening. Gant sent that co-worker home early. Now the vault was his. Then he started loading the van. Not for a minute, not for 5, for more than an hour. Cube after cube of banded cash out of the vault and into the back of a company van, over an hour of steady, patient work. And the whole time, the Loomis Fargo security cameras were running. They recorded all of it. They recorded him. When he was done, the van held more than $17 million. At the time, it was one of the largest cash robberies the United States had ever seen. But here is where the amateurs start to show. $17 million sounds like a briefcase. In a movie, it's a briefcase. In real life, it is not. A lot of that money was in small bills, stacks of 20s, and small bills are heavy. The full haul weighed well over a ton. Gant and his friends were moving the cash out of the company van and into their own private cars, and the cash simply would not fit. So they made a decision. They left some of it behind, about $3 million abandoned in the back of the van. Think about that. They robbed a vault, and then they had to leave $3 million on the floor because it was too heavy to carry. That is the first clue to who these people really were. Not masterminds, not professionals, people who had never thought about what a fortune actually weighs. Now the money had to be divided, and the plan had a second moving part. David Gant was the obvious suspect. He knew it. The night the robbery was discovered, his name would be at the top of the list. So the plan was for Gant to leave the country, disappear into Mexico, lie low and wait for things to cool down. And the man who actually carried out the robbery left with $50,000, out of more than $17 million. All the rest of it, the real fortune, stayed behind in Charlotte with Steve Chambers. Sit with that gap for a second. The robber is now in another country, nearly broke. The money is here with men who never went near the vault. That gap is the whole case. If you want to watch the FBI close it, stay with me. And if you like a case built on one small detail, take a second and subscribe. The robbery was discovered fast, and the FBI did exactly what you'd expect. By the next morning, one Loomis Fargo employee was unaccounted for. The security tape showed that same employee loading the van. David Gant was the prime suspect almost immediately. But knowing who did it is not the same as closing the case. Because Gant was gone. He was somewhere in Mexico, and he was nearly broke. He had $50,000, and that was it. Catching David Gant wouldn't get the FBI 1 cent of the $17 million. The money was somewhere else, with people they couldn't yet name. That was the real case. Not the man who took the money. The people who were now holding it. And those people were not careful. Not even a little. Steve Chambers and his wife, Michaela, had been living in a mobile home. Within about 3 weeks of the robbery, that changed completely. They bought a house. Not a modest one. A $635,000 home, up on a mountain. And they paid for a large part of it in cash. Stacks of bills, carried into offices that were not used to seeing that. Then came a brand new BMW. Then the furniture, the decorations, the things people buy when money stops feeling real. Among the things later seized from them was a velvet painting of Elvis. There was also a carved wooden figure almost as tall as a man. This was the spending of people who had no idea how to be quietly rich. And they were not the only ones. Another man in the circle, Eric Payne, paid off a credit card in a single payment. Then he bought a Harley, then a Chevy Tahoe. When ordinary people suddenly spend like that, other people notice. The first real thread came from a tip. Someone told the FBI that Eric Payne, a regular guy, was throwing money around he should not have had. That tip pointed straight at the circle of friends around Steve Chambers. And then there was the bank. Michaela Chambers walked into a bank to deposit cash, and she asked the teller a question. She wanted to know how much she could deposit before the bank had to report it to the federal government. It's a question you ask when you're trying to stay under the radar, but asking it does the opposite. It is the radar. A question like that gets written down. It becomes a report, and the report goes to exactly the people she was trying to avoid. So now the FBI was watching the Chambers, listening to their calls, following their money. But watching isn't the same as proving. The FBI had a couple living far above their means. That's suspicion. It isn't a heist. Plenty of people spend money they shouldn't. To tie the Chambers to the vault, the FBI needed something physical, something that could only have come from inside that building. And they found it, in the money itself. To understand the crack in this case, you have to understand one small, boring thing about how cash is handled. When professionals count and bundle cash, they wrap each stack in a paper band, a currency strap, a little loop of paper around the bills. And the person who counts that stack often marks the band. Their initials, a note, a small signature so the company knows whose hands the money passed through. It is the most ordinary thing in the world. Inside a place like Loomis, Fargo, nobody thinks twice about it. When the FBI examined the cash Michaela Chambers had been depositing at the bank, they found a packet still wrapped in its band. A Loomis Fargo band, and on that band were the initials of a Loomis Fargo employee. Here is the detail that closes the case. That employee had worked at the Charlotte Vault and had quit the facility before the robbery ever happened. Think about what that means. A band marked by that worker around cash that worker had counted could only have come from one place, the inside of that vault. Not a casino. Not a bank withdrawal. Not money won at cards. That band sat inside the Loomis Fargo vault in Charlotte, the exact vault David Gant emptied. And now it was wrapped around cash that Michaela Chambers had carried into a bank. That was the first solid, physical proof tying the Chambers directly to the stolen money. Not a tip, not a feeling. The money itself still wearing the vault's own paperwork. And here is the part that should stop you cold. They never took the bands off. They had stolen $17 million. They had weeks, and it never occurred to them to do the one thing a child could think of, strip the wrapping off the money. A strip of paper worth nothing. The cheapest thing in the entire vault. That's the piece of the 17 million that could not lie about where it came from. While the FBI was building that case in Charlotte, the plan was quietly falling apart in Mexico. David Gant was the man who had robbed the vault. And now he was nearly out of money, in a foreign country, with no way to get more on his own. So he did the only thing he could. He called home. He called Steve Chambers, the man holding the rest of the money, and asked for more. Chambers sent him a little, around $8,000 a scrap, against the millions Chambers was sitting on back in North Carolina. And that's when Steve Chambers started thinking about David Gant as a problem. Gant was the one man who could name everyone, the one witness who could bring the whole thing down. As long as Gant was alive, Chambers was exposed. So Chambers decided the simplest fix was to have Gant killed. He reached out to a man to do it. There was only one thing Steve Chambers had not accounted for. The FBI was already listening to his calls. Agents heard the plot take shape. They knew Chambers wanted Gant dead, and they knew something Gant himself did not. His own partners were trying to kill him. That turned a slow investigation into a race. The FBI had to get to David Gant before the man Chambers had hired did. And they had a way to find him. Gant kept calling home. Every call he made was a thread, and the FBI followed it. One of those calls was traced to a town on the Mexican coast, Playa del Carmen. On the 1st of March, 1998, agents working with Mexican authorities moved in and arrested David Gant. And by most accounts, Gant was not afraid when they came for him. He was relieved. Because he had started to understand what was happening. He knew the men he'd trusted had stopped sending money. He had a feeling about why. Being arrested by the FBI meant he was going to prison, but it also meant he was going to live. The handcuffs were the safest place he'd been in months. The day after Gant was caught, the rest of it collapsed. On the 2nd of March, the FBI arrested Steve Chambers, Michelle Chambers, Kelly Campbell, and others in the circle. In the end, the investigation reached about 24 people. The ones who planned the robbery, and the ones who helped move and hide the money afterward. The mansion, the cars, the Velvet Elvis, all of it was seized and later sold off at auction. The FBI recovered around 88% of the stolen money. Roughly $2 million was never found. Steve Chambers, the organizer, got the longest sentence, more than 11 years. Michelle Chambers and Kelly Campbell got prison time of their own. And David Gant, the man who actually loaded the van, served 7 years and was fined $26,000. If you're still here, you're watching the right part of the case, the one detail everyone else walked past. Take 1 second now and subscribe. Step back and look at the whole thing. The robbery itself needed almost no skill. A man with a key, a van, and an hour. That part worked. What it did not survive was the spending, and underneath the spending, one strip of paper. They thought about the cameras a little. They thought about leaving the country. They thought about hiring a killer. What they never thought about was the cheapest thing in the vault, the band around the cash, the bank's own paperwork, still attached to the money. $17 million, and the crack that opened the case was a loop of paper they could have torn off in a second and burned. They guarded the fortune. They never thought to check what the fortune was still wearing. A vault emptied in an hour, undone by a strip of paper nobody bothered to remove. That's the case. If you see things other people miss, hit subscribe. Case Vault drops a new one twice a week, and the next crack is sharper than this one.